everybody. Raul here with Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of catching up with our old friend and bassist for the Darkness, Frankie Poullain. Hey, it's time for tea.
Good to see you again, Raul. Good to see you.
My pleasure, man. Time flies when we're having fun, and it's been almost 2 years since we chatted last. You guys, the Darkness, has been really busy in the meantime, so we want to fast forward and leap ahead. You're getting ready to release a new concept album, Easter is Cancelled, in October. You've already been teasing us with some video stuff. There's some great things happening. But tell us, this is a concept album. Tell us about this project.
Well, it's a concept which evolved through the band spending 9 months together and writing and recording in a different way. For the first time, we came up with the idea of getting it down when it was hot, you know. So writing and recording the tracks within a couple of weeks of the songs being written.
Wow.
That's what I mean by getting them down when they're hot. Because what we found with the albums beforehand is that the demos, there was something that we lost from the demos to the recording, because the demos would be done in the songwriting sessions that we had, which were in these overseas locations in Ireland or on the coast of Spain or Scotland, always on the coast for those two albums. Mm-hmm. The albums I'm talking about are Last of Our Kind and Pound Smile. But what we found is that when we recorded the songs a year later, there was just some unknown piece of magic that disappeared that we wouldn't quite be able to recapture, possibly because we overthought things. And there's something about the feeling of the songs, you know, when they're hot and you've written them, you know, and they're still hot-blooded, if you like, you know, and alive, you know, throbbing, you know, they're throbbing with something. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to do that this time. And also we wanted to spend a long stretch of time with each other. So we basically spent 9 months. We'd have the weekends off usually, but we spent a hell of a lot of time with each other. I was staying at Dan's a lot of the time. That's where the album was recorded, at Dan Hawkins' studio in the countryside of Sussex, which is very close to Brighton, on the south coast of England.
Mm-hmm. That spontaneity that is captured, the foundation and the basis of this album is one of kind of a very interesting scientific theory of parallel universes. Tell us, how did this idea come up?
Well, it came up with the phrase Easter is cancelled is actually where it started from. Mm-hmm. So like a lot of exciting things that seem surreal or abstract, it was an accident. Our manager was giving us things to do and planning this year, and he said things start to stack up around Easter time, and then he said Easter is cancelled. This was in an email conversation, and I said that's an album title, surely. That means something, you know. I knew it meant something, mm-hmm. and I wasn't sure what it was. And then Justin, immediately being Justin, he pulled up this Frank Farelli. What's that graphic artist? Frank Fazali. It's the Justin has one of the tattoos based on his works on his back, where it's the man's fist and the naked women are all hanging off this guy's fist. He pulled up a picture of his, which was basically a muscle-bound Jesus snapping a crucifix, and that obviously represents empowerment. In a way, it's like a fuck you to the establishment. It's like saying you're trying to crucify me, but I'm not going to let you crucify me. So it's a metaphor for standing against the establishment, and it's almost like a what if. What if people could have these superpowers to withstand authority and the ugliness of power, corruption, and lies, which, of course, throughout history have imprisoned us, you know, and crushed the human spirit. We all know that so much great art is anti-establishment in nature.
Well, this is so timely.
Exactly.
In both your neck of the woods and in our neck of the woods. And many times it has been the musicians that have been the outspoken people to give a voice to what many are thinking, but haven't found a way to express.
Exactly.
So that it's quite timely.
Exactly. I couldn't agree with you more. And you have to be transgressive, really, sometimes to express uncomfortable truths. Some people will be offended by that. Certain Christians, it might not fit in with their particular teachings. But I think really that could be more of a reflex, because I think if you actually look at the message that we're trying to get across, of course it's a positive one. It's one of empowerment, and they're refusing to be crushed. So in many ways it's a call to arms for musicians who are finding it very difficult. Rock music, which is obviously in a perilous state, but it's also a metaphor, of course, just for what you're referring to, which is we're not just being crushed by tyrants, we're being crushed and ruled by the most idiotic tyrants that you can imagine. Even looking back through human history, I'm sure you'd be very hard pressed to find anything to match Trump and Boris Johnson. I mean, you'd have to go back really to the very early monarchy in this country, when you had these oafs, you know, who used to kind of rule the countries, or, you know, the people like King Henry VIII, maybe, you know, and then of course some of the Roman emperors who were really demented as well.
Yes, Caligula.
But, yeah, of course, exactly. And people are going to look back, of course, at Trump in the same way, if people are still going to be around in several centuries, whatever state the planet's going to be in. Anyway, bringing things back to music, we're also laying down the gauntlet to ourselves with this concept album, because it's about survival of relationships, and it ends up, of course, with Way the Guitar Man, which is coming back to the founding relationship, which is of man and his guitar, man or woman, and his hair guitar, stroke bass guitar in my case.
And I know you're still sporting your Gibson Thunderbird.
Yep, the older they get, the better. I've got the 50th anniversary edition, you know, the gold one, which is nice, and it's got a nice toppiness to it, but you know, those 90s ones are really nice, you know, and they just get nicer and nicer. The more you play them, of course. My brown bastard, I just love it so much. Since I've last talked to you, I've had a rod put through the neck, because that neck snapped 4 times. And each time it was glued back together, I felt like it sounded better, because I really feel like, you know, they're like humans, you know, they respond to breakages and suffering. And almost like the survival in spite of everything gives an extra dimension to the sound. You know, when you're handling wood in that way, you know, you really feel like, and woods, the amount of times I've referenced wood recently, you know, when I'm walking through countryside. I live close to a place called Hampstead Heath, which is a huge park in North London. And I just keep coming back to wood, you know, with music, you know. Music is essentially man's relationship with wood, you know, classical music and rock music.
Yeah. Well, there's a resonance between the materials, and you're absolutely right. The life after death, because so many times after a tree has been cut, the wood is dead, but in musical instruments, it still seems to continue with a life and existence of its own that just improves. And this is why so many manufacturers have tried aging processes to duplicate this, but there's no substitute for something that was done at this other age. And I spoke with a bassist who has an old Fender, and the headstock is just grimy looking, and it's been played so much that it has an indentation on the back where your thumb goes. It's where B is, and you can find it automatically in the dark. You close your eyes, you go, okay, here's where B is, and it is right there. And he says he doesn't want to clean it up because he's afraid it's going to lose like its mojo that it has of all of the bars and the smoke and the spit and everything.
And the dust, you know, if there's dust in the guitar, somehow it sounds nicer. You know, because wood is porous, it soaks up, you know, and it gets the vibrations from your fingers. Guitar is like a woman, you know. If it's untouched, it goes cold.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sure I could word that slightly better, actually, if I had a poetry book to hand. But anyway, that's the principle, yeah.
Well, I want to come back to this because there's some singles. I mentioned the teasers. Heart Explodes. The video is out. It's a lyrical video. It's got kind of an animated nature. The one that really grabbed me, and is probably the one that you guys want to grab us the most, is this opening, Rock and Roll Deserves to Die. And it has so many elements of musicianship. It's got kind of, I'll call it an acoustic side that explodes and evolves. And before it's all said and done, I'm certainly seeing a lot more of Justin than I ever imagined I might. So
I'm so proud of that song. I'm so happy with it. I guess if I'm talking about the 9-month period of the album, the recording and a lot of the writing, that evolved halfway through. And that was the most conceptual in nature. We had that chord sequence, which is the pre-chorus, rock and roll, your time has finally come, now I'm afraid you must die. And that was actually Dan who first sang that. And he did it in a kind of quite tongue-in-cheek way. And we left it for a while because, of course, the chord sequence is a little bit cod, Led Zeppelin. And we didn't want to do something as simplistic as that. We realized we would have to garnish it with a lot more musical elements either side of that pre-chorus to really give it real emotion and credibility. So then we realized we'd have to come up with a really powerful verse that didn't sound like it was a Led Zeppelin tribute. So we developed that, and we realized this song really had to be almost the song that really defined our whole career and our raison d'etre. And that's basically we were trying to write our, if you forgive me saying this, our Paranoid Android and Stairway to Heaven, our kind of Bohemian Rhapsody. And I really feel that with this song, we've encapsulated our raison d'etre, why we're here. We've also expressed our musical obsessions, our signatures, the medieval aspects, which we return to on each album, often with just one song. But on this album, there's probably more than just one song, which has medieval feel to it. The mandolins coming back after being on Last of Our Kind.
Yes.
They were on Last of Our Kind on 3 songs. Dan is particularly responsible for that. He's very keen on that aspect of the band sound. And Justin actually doing it in a way that wasn't jokey. There's jokiness at the end.
Yes.
There's a little bit of jokey flavour in there, but it's not kind of silly kind of humour, I don't think. I think it's a sense of the ridiculous, It's kind of absurd because rock and roll is absurd, especially in 2019.
I always like to try to mentally compartmentalize the uniqueness of the Darkness sound, but by the same token, and I do mean in the most complimentary way possible, I was capturing elements of what I feel are a lot of the classic, iconic pieces in rock. So elements of Queen, elements of Zeppelin, elements of rock operas that have come from before, The Who, all of these, some of these details in the musical notes. It's still very unique and it's still very the Darkness, but the vocal harmonies and the guitar work are just obscene. They're so strong and massive and in your face that you go, oh my gosh, what am I listening to? Where is this coming from? So it's super impressive. I'm really thrilled.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm really glad you appreciate it. We did go to a lot of care and attention to do it, and you can't really do that. You can't take on those classical themes and reference bands like that without care and attention. And that's why we spent 9 months making this album. And that song took the longest to record and to write as well.
And there are other tracks that will have a softer nature because, again, I think there was a love, laughter, the deck chair.
I'm so glad that you said love and laughter because to me the album is heartache, love and laughter. That's the emotional elements of this album, and that's the journey of the album as well. The emotional journey is one that starts with heartache, broken relationships, being a touring rock musician, love between the band members, love that you've lost, and the laughter, which is what keeps us going. That's the fuel. The fuel for the Darkness is laughter. The laughter we have for each other, because that's how we express our love for each other, really, as guys in a band. And I think it's the right kind of laughter. It's not the laughter of mockery. I don't think it's cheap laughter. It's rich laughter. It's laughter for people that love what they do, that have passion for what they do. And Deck Chair, thanks for noticing Deck Chair. I'm really happy with that song too. Yeah. It's actually myself on classical guitar. It's something I've done quite a lot times in the past where I've come to the guys with what they call my French jazz pieces, which aren't really suitable for the band. And this time I was playing a lot of classical guitar over the winter, and I would bring little pieces into the studio, and Justin just tuned into that one straight away and then went into theatrical mode. He was channeling this kind of theatre character, almost 19th century theatre character, and I just love what he did. There's no point in trying to define what that character was, really. It's something just kind of abstract, but he was for sure channeling. He's channeled in the past. In Open Fire, he's channeling in a completely different way. He's channeling, that's not Justin Hawkins singing if you listen to Open Fire, because he's singing in a different voice. But this was 19th century theatre kind of channeling. And the deck chair is a metaphor for loss. Again, it's the loss of a family relative of his. I'll let him talk about that in interviews, because I'm not sure how he wants to approach that. But really, it can be the loss of anything. It can be the loss of an ex-partner. It's some kind of bereavement, kind of tragic, and you can feel the tragedy in the song. Mm-hmm. It was a challenge for me to put down that guitar part, because I'm far from being a good classical guitarist. But I'm really pleased with the arrangement, and the emotion it conveys, I think, is really, really strong, you know?
Well, I think the key is the relatability. And as the listening public hears these songs, I mean, these are very universal concepts. Everybody suffers loss of one sort of another, and it kind of clicks in. And the other part of it, I think that it accentuates the fact that many rock and roll musicians are so much deeper than they're given credit for.
Like Justin in particular, he's written off and misunderstood by so many people, but you can never second guess him or put him in a box. He's so slippery.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that especially in the old days of rock and roll, rock groups may have been trivialized or made kind of funny to maybe make them seem harmless, even though they had messages and things.
It's true. And also, because they were high all the time, they were easy. It's easy to ridicule someone who's off their head, you know?
Yeah.
You know, and in the same way, sports people get a hard time too, because sports performers are always interviewed straight after they've been performing. Mm-hmm. So they're completely spent, completely exhausted and sweaty. So everyone has this thing that footballers are thick as two sharp planks. And it's so patronizing, because all the great sports people, soccer players no less, have real kind of intelligence, you know. Mm-hmm. They have a way of looking at things, taking things in, planning, spatial awareness. They have a different type of intelligence. And mockery of rock musicians or footballers is something really, it's a class thing. It's something I think that middle class and upper class people do, basically because these are working class people. I think there's something quite dark behind it. These are working class people who should know their place. Certainly, I'm not sure, but in the States it's not quite the same history, but in Britain, very much rock music and football were working class pursuits. And often it was the only way out for a guy coming from that background. Sure. The only way out, the only thing they could dream of was to be a footballer or a rock star or a pop star.
And I think that it's perfect because of the classic nature of the music and the dimension of it, as a reminder that there's so much more to the musicians. Often when you look back at certain tunes, kind of historically, just the other day I was listening to a song and it was done by a rock and roll musician, but it was a piano arrangement of it. And when I heard it, I'm going, wow, what a beautiful song. And I went back and looked, oh, well, this guy did it. This is true with, I think this would be true with my deck chair, as people look forward and go, what a lovely, moving tune. Now, I'm going to go from that deep tune to kind of the final rallying cry of "We Are the Guitar Men," kind of a reminder to the rock and roll community, you know, kind of stand up and play.
Yeah. You've actually picked out my 3 favorite songs on the album. I'm so glad that you appreciate them. "We the Guitar Men," I just love the warmth. I love that verse. Dan had the chorus, the chords for the chorus, and we talked about referencing guitars. A friend of mine, actually a painter friend of mine, sent me a clip on WhatsApp of this lovely folk song from the 70s where somebody was celebrating painting, just talking about how much they love painting. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the songs we were writing on the album were about, you know, the end of relationships. And I said to Justin, why not come up with a song that just celebrates how much you love your guitar? It's the kind of thing that people would be embarrassed about doing. It's a song that's so out of time now. So we had this piece of music which Dan had for the chorus, and we decided to make that the Guitar Man theme. And then we needed a poignant verse. Dan got quite frustrated. We couldn't find out with someone, so he just left it to me and Justin. And then we came up with this thing, which is probably the most, I hate to use this expression, but I just use this in a descriptive fashion. It's probably the most Beatles-esque thing we've ever done, because the melody it really does have a McCartney-esque feel to it. Mm-hmm. I know I would cringe if I heard someone else say that, but I feel like it's one of the most melodic things we've ever done, is that verse of Guitar Man. And I think it's so important to have the emotional sounding verse, because it really is about the deep love for your guitar, mm-hmm. which a lot of people would just think was naff to talk about, but really it is actually probably the most important relationship in the history of the Darkness, is the love that the Hawkins brothers have for their guitars.
Absolutely. Well, and the musicians in the audience will totally get that, because it is our instruments that we worry about when we're away from home, or when you're touring, you're making sure that everything is more than probably anything else.
Yeah. And of course, also, I feel like it's Spinal Tap talking like this, but the guitar is also obviously a metaphor for a sweet lady as well, you know?
Absolutely.
Which, of course, has been done many times, but it's worth mentioning in case people have forgotten.
There we go. It's universal. Well, we're so excited. With Easter is canceled, the teases are amazing. I'll make sure we share them here so people don't even have to search. I just saw that the footage behind the scenes of Rock and Roll Deserves to Die is released, so I'll make sure we include that as well. I know that there's probably touring supporting this album coming in the near future.
Yep, we're going to be in the States in April. That's going to be announced. That's the last leg of the tour that's unannounced. That's going to be announced shortly in the next couple of weeks, so I hope. Starting off in the UK, Europe. Europe's going to be January, UK in November, December, and then it's going to be Australia, March, and then it's going to be the States in I think it's going to be late April, early May.
Nice.
That should be for a month. But we are actually doing a Kiss cruise before that, with the main support on the Kiss cruise, which runs from Miami to Bahamas and then Jamaica. So that's going to be interesting. I've heard a lot about these cruises.
It should be fun. Now, if people want to stay on top of this and find out if you're going to be in a town near them, going to thedarknesslive.com, is that still the best place to look?
Yep, The Actual Darkness on Instagram, The Actual Darkness on Facebook, and all the band members have got their own accounts on Instagram as well.
Sure.
Which you can find pretty easily.
Amazing. Well, Frankie, as always, it's a pleasure chatting. We're so excited about the new work, looking forward to the tour. People, make sure that you watch these videos. It's just going to wet your whistle for the rest of it. The release on October 4th, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm excited, and I'm so glad that you're excited too, and I appreciate your kind words.
Oh, my pleasure. Folks, you've seen him here, Frankie Poullain from The Darkness, on Bass Musician Magazine.